At a cousin's engagement, my parents laughed about my imaginary fiancé, so I toasted quietly but waited until he walked in, saying, "Sorry I'm late, had to park the helicopter," unaware we had just landed from Dubai. I'm Elena, 34, born to Greek-American parents in the verdant hills of Oregon. My childhood was steeped in expectations. Attend a prestigious university, ideally Harvard or Yale, pursue medicine or law, marry by 25, produce exactly 2 children, and live close enough for my parents to drop by unannounced to critique my spanakopita recipe and rearrange my furniture. I veered off this carefully plotted course at 21 when I chose photography over pre-law. That was my first transgression. The second came when I abandoned my master's program after securing a position with an international art collective in Prague. My parents, Nikos and Sofia, were visibly disturbed. To them, freelance photography meant unemployment, and traveling exhibitions translated to wasting my education on frivolous pursuits. Every conversation felt like a defense trial where I was perpetually the accused. But my greatest offense was announcing my engagement to someone they hadn't inspected and approved. They'd always regarded my romantic choices with suspicion. I dated outside our tight-knit community. I didn't parade potential partners before the family tribunal unless things were serious. When I met Marco, a restoration architect dividing his time between Barcelona and Cairo, I waited nearly 12 months before mentioning him to my family. When I finally did, my mother's immediate reaction was, "Why haven't we seen this man? Are you certain he exists?" I might have laughed if her doubt hadn't been so genuine. Last November, my cousin Thea, 29 and flawless, announced her engagement. Her fiancé, Philip, was a Princeton-educated neurosurgeon who fulfilled every criterion on the perfect Greek son-in-law checklist. The celebration was scheduled at an elaborate venue in Portland, a lavish 3-day extravaganza featuring gourmet Mediterranean cuisine, traditional dances, olive oil tastings, and even a bouzouki performance during Sunday brunch. I expected the invitation, but not the pointed note from my mother. "Perhaps your fiancé will actually appear this time," complete with smiley face. As fate would have it, Marco and I had already arranged to be stateside for the holiday season. He had architectural conferences in Seattle, and we planned to visit friends in Vancouver afterward. We arrived from Cairo 2 days before Thea's celebration. Marco had a last-minute consultation on the afternoon of the engagement, but promised to join me by dinner. The twist? We were traveling by helicopter. He had borrowed a colleague's aircraft to navigate between several restoration sites, which sounds pretentious, but was genuinely more efficient than battling Pacific Northwest traffic between multiple events. I arrived alone. From my first step inside, the familiar pattern emerged. Whispers, artificial smiles, and the predictable interrogation from extended family. "Where's this fiancé of yours? Still in Egypt? Have you considered adoption? Elena, dear, we're concerned." Such a free spirit. I smiled politely, gritted my teeth, and snapped photos with Thea. I tried focusing on being supportive, but then I overheard my mother at a cocktail table near the bar, laughing with her sister, Thea's mother, and several other women. "I've stopped asking," she declared. "He's in historical preservation." What does that even mean? Is he digging up artifacts? She never shows any pictures. I told Nikos, maybe he's a figment of her imagination. They all erupted in laughter. Not discreet chuckles, but full-throated, contemptuous guffaws. I stood there, clutching my sparkling water, willing my hand to remain steady. I should have walked away. Instead, I froze, absorbing every word. There seemed nothing left to say to them, but I knew what was coming when toasts began after dinner. The event coordinator asked me to say a few words. I think she assumed I was on the official program. Thea's friends, Philip's relatives, even my younger brother Alex, whom I hadn't spoken with in months, all offered heartfelt words about true love. Everyone turned expectantly as I approached the microphone. I wore an emerald silk dress, hair elegantly styled, with subtle gold accessories, understated but refined. I stood before a sea of faces that had never truly believed in me. Without preparation, I began. "I'll be brief. I simply want to say how beautiful it is witnessing 2 people who are supported, celebrated, and believed in. Not everyone receives that gift, so if you do, cherish it." A smattering of polite applause followed, and then it happened. A mechanical whirring, initially faint, then unmistakable. The sound of helicopter blades cutting through air. People began murmuring. Thea glanced toward the windows, perplexed. The coordinator rushed toward the entrance, and then Marco appeared. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, no tie, expensive watch gleaming under the chandeliers, hair slightly tousled. He looked distinctly out of place, yet somehow made everyone else appear underdressed. "Sorry I'm late," he announced with a smile. "Had to park the helicopter." Someone actually gasped. Then he walked directly to me and kissed my forehead. "Did I miss your toast?" he whispered. "No," I replied. "You're exactly on time." The atmosphere transformed immediately. I didn't need to survey the room to sense it. The quality of attention shifted, no longer tinged with skepticism or that particular brand of artificial courtesy I'd grown accustomed to at family gatherings. Curiosity had replaced judgment. Eyes followed Marco as he graciously introduced himself to those nearest us, including my aunt, Thea's mother, who suddenly seemed uncertain how to rearrange her expression quickly enough, and my mother, whose fingers nervously adjusted her shawl, her mouth slightly agape, as if debating whether to smile or maintain the half-smirk of disbelief she'd worn earlier. Marco greeted her without hesitation. "Sophia, it's wonderful to finally meet you," he said warmly, extending his hand. She paused longer than necessary before accepting the handshake. "Oh," she managed. "Yes, of course. Hello." Her tone matched exactly the one she used with neighbors she secretly disliked, but maintained civility with, the ones with overgrown hedges or too many wind chimes. Marco turned toward my father, who stood slightly behind her, more composed but equally surprised. "Nikos," he nodded respectfully. "I've heard so much about you." My father offered a firm handshake, concealing his discomfort better than my mother, but I noticed it. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening around the jaw. He was evaluating Marco as he might assess potential business partners, or unfamiliar contractors. "I understand you work in architectural preservation," he probed. Marco nodded. "Yes, primarily consulting now. Projects throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean, though I still do hands-on restoration occasionally. Keeps me connected to the craft." Several people nearby chuckled, not because it was particularly humorous, but because they were adjusting their perceptions. Suddenly, I wasn't the deluded daughter who invented an international fiancé to avoid embarrassment at family functions. I was the enigmatic cousin who arrived alone but whose partner descended dramatically like the climax of a film. The helicopter certainly made an impression, but more significant was Marco's presence, his ability to materialize in a way no one in that room could disregard. As eager second cousins and curious uncles pulled him into conversation, suddenly fascinated by his profession, I observed the scene with detachment. It felt surreal. For years I'd entered rooms like this one, mentally bracing for judgment, and now I was the catalyst for everyone else's discomfort. My brother Alex, still smug from his earlier speech, approached during dessert. "So, that's him?" he asked. I looked at him, exhausted, but unwilling to forfeit the moment. "Yes," I replied. "That's Marco." He gave a short laugh, watching Marco engaged with the small crowd surrounding him. "Honestly didn't think he existed." "Yes," I said. "Many people didn't." He paused, perhaps to apologize or change subjects, but I didn't allow it. Instead, I walked away to check on Thea. To her credit, she seemed completely unbothered by the attention Marco's entrance had diverted from her celebration. She'd always possessed that quality. Graceful, centered, with just enough rebelliousness to quietly support me while never confronting her mother directly. She squeezed my hand as I approached. "Best moment of the entire evening," she whispered. "I wasn't trying to overshadow your celebration," I said sincerely. "You didn't," she responded. "You just reclaimed your dignity, and it was absolutely necessary." Later that evening, my mother cornered me near the staircase leading to the valet area. She appeared unsettled, yet curious. "Why didn't you tell us he was coming?" she asked. I shrugged. "Would it have made any difference?" She hesitated. I didn't realize." "What didn't you realize?" I asked, arms crossed. She studied her hands, then met my eyes again. "I didn't realize he was serious." And there it was, the weight of every conversation we'd never properly had. Every attempt to explain my life choices met with concern, doubt, and dismissal. Their persistent implication that I was performing adulthood incorrectly because I refused to follow their prescribed path. But now she was trying, awkwardly and hesitantly, but trying nonetheless. "I'm glad you came," she added after a moment. "Me too," I said, and meant it, not for their sake, but for my own. Marco found me shortly afterward on the venue's rooftop garden. It was quieter there, removed from the lights, photographers, and endless buffet tables. He wrapped his arms around me from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder. "How did it go?" he asked. I smiled, watching city lights shimmering in the distance. "Better than anticipated," I said. "Worse than it should have been." He remained silent briefly. "Then they'll catch up eventually. I'm not waiting for them," I replied. "I know," he said, holding me closer. We stood there for quite some time. The music below had transitioned to something mellower. Gentler conversations drifted into the night like smoke. I couldn't predict what would develop with my family, whether they'd make greater efforts, whether this evening would truly change anything. But I recognized this. For once, they saw me, and more importantly, I saw myself clearly. Marco and I remained on that rooftop until nearly everyone had departed. The stars were faint above the city's glow, but the air felt clearer. Below us, the celebration dwindled into that awkward interim when aunts begin collecting leftovers in containers and uncles linger with whiskey glasses, reluctant to leave but contributing nothing to conversation. We observed it all from above, like spectators of a drama we no longer needed to participate in. Eventually, we descended to bid farewell to Thea and Philip. They swayed on the dance floor, slightly intoxicated and radiant with the confidence of people who never needed to fight for acceptance. I embraced Thea warmly. "You were wonderful," I told her. "So were you," she replied. "You can't imagine how satisfying that was to witness." We both laughed. Philip offered Marco a fist bump, which Marco returned with his characteristic composed confidence. As we joined the valet queue, I sensed my parents watching from across the room. They said little during our departure. My father offered a respectful nod, and my mother gave Marco a thin smile that almost resembled warmth. It was sufficient. I wasn't expecting transformation, but recognized something had shifted, perhaps not dramatically or instantaneously, but fundamentally. Back at our hotel, I removed my emerald dress, washed away my makeup, and collapsed onto the bed with an exaggerated sigh. "That challenging?" Marco asked, already partially undressed, draping his suit over a chair. "Not challenging," I said, staring upward. "Just intense. Have you ever entered a room where everyone pretends you're invisible? Then suddenly they're memorizing your resume?" He chuckled. "Yes, most rooms, actually." I laughed because that exemplified why we functioned well together. He understood concepts I never needed to explain twice. "Any regrets?" he asked after a pause. "About tonight?" I propped myself up on my elbows. "None whatsoever, because despite all the tension, passive-aggressive remarks, and years of being marginalized and misunderstood, this transformation was necessary. Not to validate my relationship, but to confront what had overshadowed me for years." Marco lay beside me, one arm tucked behind his head. "You never needed me to prove anything," he said quietly. "You already had. Perhaps, but it certainly helped." The subsequent days were peculiar. There was no dramatic confrontation, no major argument, no sudden dinner invitations or emotional reconciliations, but subtle changes emerged. My father sent a link to an architecture article from The Guardian with a message. "Reminded me of that Mediterranean project you mentioned. Interesting perspective." My mother posted in our family group chat with a photo from the engagement party, showing Marco and me standing near the stage, smiling. Caption: "Finally completed the family album." It marked her first public acknowledgement of him. My aunt, Thea's mother, who had laughed most loudly at the imaginary fiancé joke, sent a friend request on Instagram and liked several of my professional photographs from Turkey and Portugal. Even Alex messaged me. "Elena, sorry if I've been insufferable. That entrance was legendary. Not sure if this qualifies as an apology or admiration. Let's say both." I didn't respond immediately, but recognized it as a conciliatory gesture wrapped in typical brotherly sarcasm. One afternoon, while still in Portland, I visited my childhood home to collect some items. My mother had prepared a few things for me: jewelry from an heirloom collection, a hand-woven shawl that belonged to my grandmother, and a specific cooking pot she insisted was too valuable to ship overseas. Marco waited in the car reviewing emails while I went inside. The house remained unchanged. It still smelled of oregano and lemon. The framed family photographs in the hallway had been updated. Recent additions included Thea and Philip, and surprisingly, one new image showed Marco and me at the engagement, standing together, smiling. I paused. "Did you have this printed?" I asked when my mother entered the hallway. She glanced at the photograph, then at me. "Thea emailed it," she explained. "I liked it. It's a nice picture. It is. A lengthy silence followed. She adjusted a decorative plate on the sideboard, though it needed no adjustment. I may have misjudged, she finally admitted. He seems considerate. I wasn't certain how to respond. It wasn't quite an apology, but represented the closest approximation we'd ever achieved. I never wanted to impress you, I said. I just needed you to stop assuming I was fabricating my life. She didn't contest this. You've always chosen different paths, she observed. That's difficult for us to comprehend, but perhaps different doesn't necessarily mean incorrect. An incomplete acknowledgement, but still a fracture in the wall. I accepted the box she handed me, hugged her briefly, and departed before either of us could damage the moment by saying too much. When I returned to the car, Marco glanced up. Everything okay? I nodded. Yes. He didn't press for details. That's another reason I love him. He understands that sometimes silence provides the most profound peace. We flew back to Cairo the following week. The visit had depleted me emotionally, in ways I hadn't fully recognized until we landed back in our adopted city. With the warm, dry air against my skin and the blend of Arabic and international languages humming around us, the city was vibrant, dynamic, and boldly unapologetic. Unlike the cautious, diminished version of myself I often became in my parents' presence. Marco and I avoided discussing the engagement party for some time. We didn't need to. The visit had accomplished what was necessary, and we returned to our established rhythm. Late dinners on our terrace, weekends exploring archaeological sites, flights to meetings in Amman or Berlin. We returned to ourselves, yet something lingered. Not resentment, not even the desire for approval anymore. It was the sensation of unfinished business. Back in Oregon, my parents had taken minute steps toward acknowledging my reality, but they had never truly comprehended what I had created or what it had cost me. For years, they had dismissed and questioned, secure in the superiority of their chosen path. They didn't believe I was capable of building something authentic, something entirely mine, and I didn't merely want them to gradually accept it. I wanted them to witness my success, unequivocally and undeniably. That's when inspiration struck. Several months after our return, Marco and I received invitations to present at a prestigious cultural heritage summit in Cairo. He would deliver a lecture on preserving historical architecture in conflict zones. I was being recognized for my documentary photography series, which had just secured a 6-figure publishing deal after being acquired by a major international arts foundation. The organizers requested a keynote on documenting cultural identity across borders and building an independent artistic career, and they selected me. I agreed on one condition, that I could invite personal guests. The organizers consented. I sent 2 VIP invitations to my parents with a handwritten note. You once questioned my commitment to my career. I'd like to demonstrate what commitment truly looks like. They didn't respond for 3 days. Then I received a message from my mother. We'll attend. When they arrived in Cairo, Marco collected them in our Land Rover, not the helicopter. We'd already employed that tactic, and brought them to our home, an elegant 2-story apartment in a restored colonial building with mosaic floors and an open-air courtyard. My mother's gaze moved from the antique fixtures to the modern art collection. My father attempted to remain impassive, but I detected it. The surprise, the disbelief, the recalibration. They hadn't envisioned this reality. They assumed I lived like a nomadic artist with second-hand furniture and student debt, not someone who hosted gallery openings in her courtyard and signed contracts with international publishers. The following evening at the summit, I stood on stage in a tailored black jumpsuit, hair styled professionally, every inch the woman I had fought to become. I shared my journey, not explicitly addressing family conflict, but discussing rejection, resilience, and being underestimated, about having the confidence to believe my vision was valuable even when others dismissed it. I described creating my own opportunities when traditional paths excluded me. My parents sat in the front row, my mother wiped away tears, and my father applauded longer than anyone else. After my presentation, people approached to congratulate me. Museum curators, journalists, even diplomatic staff. My father stood nearby, exchanging business cards as though attending one of his own industry conferences. That night, over dinner, my mother turned to Marco and said, "Thank you for supporting her, for believing in her when we couldn't." He smiled graciously, but didn't say, "You're welcome," because this wasn't about their vindication anymore. The true victory wasn't making them envious. It was rendering their approval irrelevant to my achievement. I no longer needed their validation, but it was gratifying, profoundly gratifying to witness the doubt in their eyes replaced by admiration, to watch them realize that I hadn't merely survived, I had flourished. Later that week, before their return flight to Oregon, my father joined me on the terrace. "You've accomplished something remarkable," he acknowledged. "I didn't recognize it before, but you've created something meaningful." I regarded this man who once told me that photography was a hobby, not a profession, who had offered to finance additional education just 2 years earlier because he feared I would end up alone and destitute. "I know," I replied simply. He nodded, then added, "I'm proud of you." It took 34 years to hear those words, and by the time he spoke them, I no longer required them, but I welcomed them nonetheless. That, to me, represented the most satisfying victory. Not the helicopter, not the keynote speech, not the business class tickets, or the view of ancient pyramids from my living room. The victory was evolving into the person they never believed I could become, and then giving them a front row seat. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed the story, please like, subscribe, and comment where you are watching from. I wish you a wonderful rest of your day.